Is there something you've never said out loud? Not to your closest friends, not to a therapist, not to your spouse, especially not. Yet you know exactly what it is, the shape of it, the weight, and you've decided probably a long time ago that nobody can ever know. Because if they did, the world would just end. That's shame. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Welcome to another episode of the Meaningful Shit Show. I'm Vincent, and today we're talking about shame. What it actually is, how it turns on you. I almost say turns on you, and what it feels like to be finally free of it. Before we dive in, I need to say this up front. I am not a licensed therapist, psychologist, medical professional. Nothing in this episode is a substitute for professional help. So if shame has gotten to a place where it's connected to thought of hurting yourself or others, if it's that heavy, please talk to someone, a therapist, crisis line, a professional, not a podcast. If you or someone you know is in crisis, please reach out to a crisis line in your country. And if the behavior underneath your shame involves anything illegal, anything that harms others, especially minors, the path forward is not just opposite action, it's getting professional help and taking accountability. All right, with that said, let's get into it. So, what is shame exactly? This is how DBT tells you whether shame fits the facts or shame is the case. Shame fits the facts whenever you will be rejected by a person or group you care about if your personal characteristics or behaviors are made public. DBT can be a little bit wordy, so let me go through that again. So shame fits the facts. Shame is the case, basically. Whenever you will be rejected by a person or group you care about, important qualifier, if your personal characteristics or behavior are made public. So there's handouts in the DBT guidebook, and they give you a family of words that live under the same name or the same word of shame. Basically, contrition, culpability, embarrassment, self-consciousness, humiliation, mortification, shyness. They're different intensity, of course, but they all point to the same thing. Note that shame is not, I did something bad. Shame is, if they knew, they would oust me. That's a different thing, and it tends to be social. There are shame societies, for example. It's about belonging and survival. And to sit with that for a second, shame isn't just about one big secret. The handout lists interpretation that trigger that, and they're basically everywhere. So, for example, believing you're not good enough, comparing yourself to others and thinking you're a loser, believing you're unlovable, thinking you're defective, looking in the mirror and hating what you see, walking into a room and feeling like you don't belong, scrolling Instagram and feeling like everyone else has it figured out, thinking your feelings are silly or stupid. All of that is shame. It doesn't need a dramatic effect. It just needs the thought, if they really saw me, all of me, they would leave. It's ancient because for most of human history, being cast out of the group, being rejected meant death, actual, literal, physical death. So your nervous system over time learned, hide this. Whatever it is, mask it, hide it, because if you expose it, you will get rejected, and rejected is death at the primal level. And your body knows this before your mind does. Emotion Regulation Handout 6, I will link all of this in the show notes, lays it out. So shame lives in your stomach, a pain in the pit of it, a sense of dread, the urge to sink down, to disappear, to cover your face, your posture collapses, head down, shoulders in, voice drops, you stop making eye contact. So that is your body trying to make you smaller so the group doesn't see you. You're trying to disappear. So shame is doing something for you. It's not a flaw in your character. It's a nervous system doing its actual job. But there's an action urge that comes to shame, and that is to hide. And hiding over time ends up being devastating, and maybe not in the way you might think. Why is shame devastating? Let me be specific about what shame actually does when it runs unchecked and amok. Because I think that people underestimate me. And chronic shame doesn't just like sit in your head, it's corrosive to the entire body. Actually, Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, I talk about this often. The title speaks to itself. Shame leads to depression, anxiety, addiction, isolation. It eats you. And I'll tell you how. First, shame sets you up to behave like a metaphorical devil. And I don't mean you consciously decide, well, I'm already a bad person, might as well be a devil. It's much subtler than that. You may subconsciously believe you're a devil or a bad person, and once that's the story, who cares? What's one more time? What's a little worse, right? Your shame is giving you a quiet pass because generally you're compartmentalizing. You're giving yourself permission to act out over here where nobody sees, where you're hidden, so that you can be a good boy or a good girl in the rest of life. That part is already broken, so what does it matter? So shame isn't just failing to stop a behavior, it's actively licensing it. And sometimes it doesn't collapse inward, it lashes out. The DBT handout lists attacking and blaming others, victim thinking, as a direct after effect of shame. That surprised me at first, but it does make perfect sense. If you can make the other person the problem, you don't have to sit what you feel about yourself. Shame can look like rage. It can look like picking a fight so you have an excuse to storm off. I'm certainly guilty of that. I have been guilty of that. It can look like, oh, you're the one who blah, 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 when it's really, I can't stand what I am right now. Not everyone who gets ashamed gets quiet. Some get loud. Maybe you can imagine a difference between stereotypical male and female, or masculine and feminine. Second, it tends to turn you into a liar. Not a dramatic liar, just a structural one that edits. Your partner asks how your day was, and you edit. Your friend asks what's going on, and you deflect. Every normal interaction becomes a small performance, and over time, the gap between who you are and who people think you are gets wider. I call that the integrity gap, and of course, it is draining to maintain. And eventually, you just stop feeling altogether. The handout calls it shutting down, blocking all emotions. Depersonalization, numbness, you're not even editing anymore. You've just checked out. Autopilot, going through the motions. And you couldn't tell someone how you actually feel because you genuinely don't know. That's not peace, of course. You're in a dissociated state. And it makes it almost impossible to solve the actual problems because you can't think clearly because your entire system is offline. And here's what makes that worse. The people who love you, they're loving someone who doesn't fully exist. They're making life decisions, staying, committing, trusting based on incomplete information. Then you're not protecting them. That's a slow motion betrayal. You might think that you're shielding them from the evil that's living in the corner, but you're actually taking away the ability to see and choose you with full knowledge. The third thing, it spreads. Probably you didn't really invent your shame. You absorbed it. From a parent who never talked about certain things, from your culture, from a household where some emotions were too much, where certain topics made the room go cold. Nobody actually sat you down in the classroom and said, you should hide this. They didn't have to. You watched and you learned. And now, without meaning to, you're actually doing the same thing. You are modeling hiding for the next generation. You're not saying a word about it. You're just creating, perpetuating is the word I'm looking for, generational trauma. It doesn't need a dramatic origin story. It just needs silence and, repeat it. And let's say that the problematic behavior, shameful behavior as victims. No accountability also means, of course, no stopping. And this is not an edge case. This is actually the norm, how harm perpetuates itself in the world. Shame doesn't prevent behavior you're ashamed about. It actually worsens it. So when I say hiding is devastating, that's what I mean. I'm not saying it's uncomfortable. It is. Not that it slows your growth. It does. It damages you and your relationships with people. Because shame's action urge is a protection mechanism with a body count. So that's why we want to work on that. I want to make a distinction because shame is not the same as guilt. I did touch on this back in episode 3, but I want to be really crisp about it because the distinction matters for everything that comes next. Guilt says I did a bad thing. Shame says I am bad. And the guilt words are different too. Remorse, regret, feeling apologetic, feeling sorry, those are guilt. Notice how they all point outward towards repair. The difference isn't just in your head, it's in your body. When you feel guilt, your face gets hot, you get jittery, although your face might get hot when you feel ashamed as well. But there's an energy to it. Guilt wants you to move. Its action urge is to fix, apologize, confess, make amends, repair the damage. So it's adaptive, it's useful. Shame is not, it's opposite. It collapses you. Dread in the pit of your stomach, remember, eyes down, voice drops, you withdraw, you avoid, you hide your face. Guilt gives you energy to repair. Shame takes your energy away, tells you to disappear. And here's the thing. The handout lists the after effects of guilt as making resolutions to change, making changes in behavior, joining self-help programs. If you're listening to this podcast right now, that's guilt doing its job. That's the adaptive emotion working. Guilt brought you here. So let's make sure that shame doesn't take you back out. Here's one that trips people up. The handout says appeasing, saying you're sorry over and over and over as a shame expression. Not guilt, by the way, shame. Because when someone is apologizing on repeat, I'm sorry, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm really sorry, you're not really repairing. An apology without an intervention, without a behavior change is just water under the bridge. No, that's not the right expression, but it's nothing. An apology by itself is not, you need a behavior change to be associated with that. So an apology is not fixing anything. That's just trying to make the rejection stop, the uncomfortable feeling of having upset someone. So it looks like guilt. It sounds like guilt, but it's actually shame wearing guilt's clothes. So where it gets really interesting, they of course are connected to each other, and to a certain extent they feed each other. Say you lose your temper at your partner. You say something genuinely cruel, something you can't take back. Guilt shows up first. Oh, that was horrible. I probably need to apologize. Now that's a healthy urge. But if shame is already in the room, and for most of us it will be, guilt becomes this like raw material, like ammunition. Oh, I lost my temper. Becomes, I am an actual abusive person. Deep down, I'm toxic and a devil. And if they really saw me, they would leave. And they should. So once shame takes over, you're not really trying to fix anything anymore. You're just trying to survive it. Hide, disappear, mask. Give yourself permission to keep going. Just on the down low where nobody sees it. Because why fight? You are already the bad thing. And that is the trap that keeps you stuck. All right, let's get a little personal. So for a significant chunk of my life, I also had a private behavior, a habit I told no one about. I never told anyone about. You can watch my episode about addiction if you want to know more about that. But the point here is that it wasn't just a secret. It was something that could not be spoken. I didn't really even have a language for it in my own head. It lived behind a wall. I had my normal life over here, relationships, work, friendships, and I had this thing over there in a room that nobody was ever going to see, designed to be hermetically closed. And I don't mean that I chose not to show him. I mean that it didn't really occur to me that showing was a responsible possibility. So, over time, it of course escalated because it wasn't checked. The shame has already told me who I was. I was someone who did this, right? Can't take that away. That was the identity. And once that's settled, once you've accepted that this is just who I am, then there's no reason to hold the line. You've already lost. What's one more thing to hide when you're already hiding everything? The shame wasn't making me fight hard. It was just giving me permission to stop. Stop fighting, but to hide. And there's this other layer. The shame wasn't just about the behavior. It was also about allowing myself to become someone I didn't like or recognize. Someone who lied by omission, who never said a word. And it wasn't that I was choosing this silence every day. It's just that I genuinely decided at some point, without ever really deciding, this was something that I would take to the grave. And that is what shame does. It doesn't say, oh, just don't tell anyone right now. It says you have to hide this permanently. This wall is load-bearing. You have to carry it in your own vault. If you take it down, everything will come crushing down. You will not survive this. So you stop even thinking about it as a choice. It's just a weight you have to carry, a fact about your life. And of course, that silence has its own cost. Because the person on the other side of the relationship, wouldn't see the whole person. And I knew that. And that knowledge also has its own kind of shame because you're hiding. So it compounds. All right, so let's get to Emotion Regulation Handout 11. So the guilt and shame, that's the pages 8 and 9. Again, I'm going to link all this. It gets really interesting. It asks you 2 questions. Is this shame justified? And separately, is the guilt justified? So your answers determine what comes next. First, how do you determine if the shame is, justified? Would people actually reject you if they knew? Not would they be surprised, not would they have opinions. You actually have to sit with the mental simulation of would they actually leave? And then the second question, does this actually violate your own values? Right? Not someone else's, yours. Because if it does not, the guilt is not justified. That gives you 4 combinations, and each has a different path forward, according to DBT. Let's start with number 1. Neither are justified. An example, survivor's guilt. I moved to the States, I made good money, I have privileges, and I had quite some opportunities that none of my friends back home have. So there's this guilt, like I don't deserve it, and I'm evil for having it. Shame about doing well, about having more, when people I love and respect are struggling. But I like to think that nobody in my life would actually reject me for being successful in my way. And it certainly doesn't violate my values. Having privilege isn't a moral failure. What you do with it can be. The guilt isn't earned and the shame isn't either. So the work here is simple. Stop hiding something that doesn't need to be hidden. Open up. Simple. Handout 13 adds something that I love. Repeat the behavior that sets off the shame over and over without hiding. Don't just stop hiding once. Keep doing the thing openly until the shame loses its grip. Because that's how you retrain your nervous system. I genuinely love that. That's another radical, do it all the way DBT thing. So, great tip. But what if the shame isn't justified, but the guilt is? I like to think about any cheap dopamine behavior I engage in or engaged in. Think of things that are relatively normal and accepted in society, such as doom scrolling, excessive gaming, pornography, pick your flavor. binging series. Nobody in my life was going to reject me for any of that. I mean, it's normal. Everybody does it. So the shame isn't justified. But the guilt, that is real. Because every hour I spent doom scrolling was an hour that I wasn't building the life that I said that I wanted. That gap between who I was and who I wanted to be, that's where guilt lives. And maybe it's in relation to relationships as well. As I'm numbing out, as I'm doom scrolling, that means I'm not engaging in the relationships in the way that I want to engage with. Maybe, that's true for sources of cheap dopamine, because that means that you're not going for the expensive dopamine that comes from having fulfilling relationships, for example. So it's justified. So the work here is about the behavior, not the self. So contrary to the previous point, I don't need to repeat the behavior until the shame goes away. And I don't need to hide either. I need to change. I need to put in some boundaries, some things that prevent the doom scrolling or, the infinite scrolling or something like that. All right, next one. Here's the one that breaks my heart a little bit. Shame is justified, guilt not justified. I would say this podcast. I know that there are people in my life who would judge me for being this publicly vulnerable, for talking about addiction, about therapy, about my childhood. It's cringe. But as someone said in my acting class, being human is cringe. So, one could say the shame is justified because the rejection is real. And that would be the reason for hiding. But the guilt, there's nothing to feel guilty about, because this doesn't violate my values. It actually is my values. And Handout 13 gives you a real menu here. You can hide what will get you rejected if you want to stay in that group. Or you can try to change their values. I like that. Or you can find a new group that fits yours. It's a real choice. And sometimes you do all three. You hide in one space, you push back in another, and find your people in a third. And you validate yourself. That's in the handout, validate yourself. Because when you're doing nothing wrong and people still reject you for it, the voice in your head starts to wonder if maybe they're right. Well, they're not. But the one thing you don't do is to change yourself to match a group whose values aren't yours. That's another conversation, honestly. Mostly about, I talk about that episode 2 on beliefs. That leaves us with door number 4, the fourth combination, the hard one. Shame is justified and guilt is justified. Relates to the story that I've told throughout this podcast, the personal story. People might leave if they know, probably. It violated my own values. Both were real. So what do you do when everything is justified? And to a certain extent, this is, of course, the meat of the episode and the meat of the DBT handouts here. Because this is the tough one, the really tough one. Although finding a new group of people can be really challenging as well. So when everything is justified, right? When both are justified, you have to deal with both sides. And this is where people get confused, because the shame path and the guilt path, they pull you in opposite directions. Shame is justified. People really might leave. That's real. So you can't just announce it to everyone. You need to be strategic. So the handout says, find people who won't reject you. That might mean hiding from certain groups while you do the work. And that's not cowardice. That's like you're surviving there, right? You're not obligated to hand ammunition to people who will use it against you. But the guilt is also justified because it actually violates what you believe in. So you can't just hide and move on. You have to do the repair work. Apologize to anyone you've hurt, and primarily to yourself for disappointing yourself, and fix what you can. Commit to not repeating it, although probably you will a couple of times. Accept the consequences gracefully. This is an important part. As part of the repair, not as punishment. And keep forgiving yourself all the way, not half-heartedly, not one toe in the water, all the way. Don't keep repeating the story of being the devil, right? Especially when you're on the path doing this work, you are not the devil anymore. You're doing the Lord's work. Sorry to get all religious on you guys, right? So it's important to speak to yourself in that manner. So both at once. Protect yourself from the groups that would reject you and repair what needs repairing with the people who won't. That's the hardest path because it asks you to do two things, to hold two truths simultaneously. I need to be safe and I need to make this right. That's a dialectic if you've never seen one. An opposite action, talk about that in context of DBT a lot. Like a lot of DBT is checking the facts, making sure that your emotions fit the facts, and then either problem solving or going opposite action. So we see opposite action, repeating itself through the curriculum, because part of what we're doing when we're doing DBT is we're training our responses to be different. The moment that we do opposite action in our nervous system and us reflecting, we'll see positive results. We will autocorrect, but we need to go against our instincts at first. And because, our instincts used to be right, but they're not right for us anymore. So we need to retrain. This is what opposite action is all about. What it's not about is pretending that you're fine. Also, the opposite of hiding isn't just broadcasting it to the world. It's just not hiding from one person, one safe person, and that's it. That's the bar. And if no one in your current environment feels safe, hey, a therapist bound by confidentiality is absolutely the place to start. It absolutely counts, and it is super opposite action. One more thing from the worksheet, and I love this as well because it's super concrete. It tells you to go against your body urges, what happens when you feel shame. So change your body posture. Lift your head, open up your chest, maintain eye contact, keep your voice steady. Your nervous system listens to your posture. If you carry yourself like someone with something to hide, you will feel like someone with something to hide, and you will act like someone with something to hide, and people will interpret you as someone with something to hide. So you have to give your body different information. You have to tell your body that we're no longer hiding, right? So different information. So that's where people do get stuck because they understand opposite action, probably makes sense, sounds good. They're willing to try it, but they don't know who to tell. And that matters because I want to highlight this. Telling the wrong person doesn't reduce the shame, it confirms it, right? You will get rejected if you share something vulnerable with someone who is silent, who flinches, who moralizes, who lectures against you, who uses it against you, even worse. Your nervous system will register that. It will register that as evidence. This is the shame loop. And it will say, see, I told you so. Stay hidden, fool. So you need to find a safe person. Someone, and if you want to find that in your immediate surroundings, try to think of someone who has shared something vulnerable with you first. It's a sign of emotional maturity. Or find someone who doesn't moralize when you're struggling, and also doesn't moralize to themselves when they're struggling. And also someone who, when they've seen you at less than your best, didn't use it against you. You're not looking for someone going like, oh, that's nothing, you're fine, don't worry about it. Then that's just dismissal. That's not safety. You're looking for someone who can actually hear you, sit with you, and see the whole you. And you have to do this in a responsible manner, right? So this requires practicing. I once heard an analogy of communication that when you're giving someone a message, sometimes the message is a bowling ball or a cannonball. And if the person is ready to accept a ping pong, like that's going to be a messy experience, right? So there's a responsibility of the sender and the receiver to make sure that the message is transferred appropriately, not that you're just throwing a cannonball to someone's chest and like running off when they expected a ping pong ball, right? So in my experience, the first person you tell is usually not in your inner circle. You definitely don't want to start with your partner. The stakes are just too high. Your muscle isn't built yet. Chances are that you'll fuck it up. Start with someone a little further from your ego. Actually, I thought, like right now in the moment, about it's kind of like weightlifting in a way, or exercising in general, right? You can't just go to the gym and like immediately like bench or squat your body weight. Like you don't know the movement patterns yet. It's irresponsible and it's going to fuck you up, right? So you want to go with someone a little further from the center of your ego. Again, the therapist, the therapy group, a men's group, a women's group can be really powerful, right? Like if you're with peers. And usually there's the group leader, et cetera, but there's not like just a trained professional that you're talking about. Also, groups tend to be cheaper. TPT groups, great for that, or you have local groups as well. A friend who has clearly done their work, it would be great too. I call those people my mental health friends. The people that help you build the mental muscle to learn what it feels like to say and survive, and then bring it to the people at the center slowly, because they deserve to know the full you too. But once you start, it will get easy. So how did it play out for me? I was already in a therapy group that helped. At some point, I also joined a men's group, and in that group, I finally, was able to say everything out loud, the things that I had been so certain that could never be spoken about. It just came out. Nothing collapsed. Nobody left the room. Nobody looked at me funny. I was still me. I was just a fucked on lighter. Doesn't mean you're just done overnight, right? You say you're done. No. You need to create distance between you and the thing before you trust or prove for yourself that this is actually behind you. And with that distance, you learn that some things that are fine for other people might not be fine for you because they can be triggering. You need your own rules to stay safe. I go deeper into all of that in episode 13 on addiction recovery if you want to go there, which turns out DBT has a chapter on as well. At the top of the episode, I asked, is there something you've never said out loud? I'm not asking you to say it now. I'm asking you to notice what happened while you were listening. Because if something came up, if a specific thing flashed through your mind, then part of you already knows it's there. And that's not the problem. It's the beginning. Shame needs you to believe that the wall is load-bearing, that if you move it, everything comes crashing down. I believed that for years. What I found on the other side is that the wall was just the wall, and that behind it was just me. Like I said, fucked on lighter. Not fixed. I still have to do work, but so much lighter. So find out which box you're in. Is the shame justified? Is the guilt? Your answers give you the path. And then you remember, you don't need to tell the entire world. You need one person, one safe person. A therapist counts, a group counts. Start where it feels survivable and go from there. The hiding costs more than the telling. It always does. Thank you so much. This has been Vincent for the Meaningful Shit Show. I hope you enjoyed that. And this is, I think this is the 4th take that I did. Man, long form content. It's a lot of work, you guys. It really is. Once you start with an episode with an idea, I always think, this is going to be easy. I'm just going to like sit down and do it. And even in this day and age where AI is so helpful in doing all the research, it's so helpful drafting scripts, so helpful fact-checking especially is really useful. Even like the third take, after the third take, I rewrote some things and I have fact-checked everything with like the DBT PDF next to it, and it was like, there were mistakes, there were some factual mistakes in there. So it's really helpful to get like better quality content out there. Plus, I don't know. I'm probably the only one that's noticing because I'm an audio video nerd. I really leveled up my game as well with my audio video stuff. Not only am I recording multiple audio streams to make sure that I'll always have a useful one. It's like my lighting situation is pretty professional. got a second angle these days. So yeah, it's fun stuff. It's also a lot of work. But I learned so much doing it as well. I've learned things about guilt and shame. As I've been creating this, I've also been thinking about, what are some of the things that pop up in my head? Because of course, it's not that there's just like one shameful topic in your life. There's always like things that's like sort of like I want to say pyramid, but I guess it's not really a pyramid. But you first take care of the big things, but then you're finding out like little things. Oh, I guess that I've been hiding this as well. And there's always priorities to things as well, right? Like there's many things to do in life, So it's always a judgment call to do all of these things. And And it's also funny because my last egg was actually pretty decent and I probably would have put it online, but I just had coffee before that, so I had a nice coffee mustache. So that's just that kind of funny. As you upgrade your audio video equipment, these things are suddenly important. But yeah. All right, I'm just ad-libbing here because I see that as my little reward towards the end of everything that I've done. For the unlikely person that is still listening to me ramble, thanks for listening to all of it. Thanks for showing up, ingesting my content. I don't know if this is something I probably should start mentioning, that I am doing much more work. Long form is my main content, but I'm using that to write Substack essays. So I have the Meaningful Shit Show on Substack. I have Instagram, also the Meaningful Shit Show. And of course, you can always go to tms.show. That's the Meaningful Shit Show. So TMS, the Meaningful Shit.show, or just themeaningfulshitshow.com. That's a website where I index everything. So I link to the Instagram posts, the Substacks, the different, YouTube podcasts, etc., etc. So that's where you can always find the latest and greatest what I'm working on. So yeah. All right. I think that's it for me. See you around, and thank you.